Nobody can contradict what he said.
That's right, that's right. All right. So it came about in those days. So what are those days? Let's talk about it some more. What are those days? How long was David there?
14 months?
Nope, not quite.
20 months?
Nope. Look at the Bible. Yeah, all right. Let's have your Bibles open. Usually I give you these answers, but this time I'm really pressing you. How long was David there? Chapter 27.
A year, 16 months.
There you go. You're close. You were super close.
600.
No. 16 months. A year and 4 months. So verse 1, now it came about in those days that the Philistines gathered their armed camps for war to fight against Israel. Achish said to David, know assuredly that you will go out with me in the camp, you and your men. So we've established that it's during the time of David's presence there that the Philistines gathered their army, and the Israelites, at least some areas that would have been defeated, are apparently not. We'll see location-wise. It doesn't matter. It'll be in the next slide. You'll see it in a moment. And Achish wants David to come with him. Why would Achish want David to come with him back?
Because he had killed the most powerful warrior.
Goliath, that's right. He knew he was a warrior. And why else? Didn't he know that Israel was David's people?
Well, he thought they rejected him completely, and so Peter goes, now, David's.
Right. And then, of course, Achish thought that David had done what?
Been overkilling the Israelites.
Been overkilling the Israelites. So he thought, well, if you're going to go ahead and do it, well, come on.
Let's do it legally.
That's right. Well, yeah, I know what you mean.
I think that's giving someone's giving something.
All right, we'll see. Verse 2. David said to Achish, very well. Now, already, it's easy for us to question the mind of David, and maybe it's prompting the reader to do that, where David says, very well. David, in other words, affirming that I will fight against the Lord's people, but let's sidebar our comments and keep reading. Very well, you shall know what your servant can do. That's true. Yeah. And so Achish said to David, very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life. The Hebrew language conveys the bodyguard to mean the keeper of my head or protection. Make sure that I'm still alive. You're going to be my main guy. Verse 3. Now Samuel was dead. Okay. We learned that a few chapters ago in chapter 25. I don't know why that has to come into play. We'll see in a moment.
Well,
We'll know in a moment. It says, now Samuel was dead. And it gives some context here. It says, and all Israel had lamented him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. And Saul had removed from the land those who were mediums and spiritists. Okay. Quick pause. We've already defined all of our terms. We know what's going on with David, Saul, the one lone priest that's left. We know that David's in the Philistine camp of Gath. We know that now he's with the army. And they're about to wage war against who? Israelites. Okay. Now, during that time, we see that Samuel had been dead for a while. Israel lamented, they buried him, they were crying, they were sorrowful, and this was our spiritual leader, and now he's gone. Samuel's two sons, well, they were corrupt anyway, so, all right. Buried in Ramah. Ramah was the city where he judged, where the altar was built, where Samuel lived. And then it says, and Saul had removed, so during the time of Samuel, presumably, had removed from the land those who were mediums and spiritualists. While Samuel was still around, seemingly, it seems to be what's implied here, at least around that time, Saul had banished all the mediums and the spiritists. Now, why would that be? Before we define more terms. Okay. That's true.
And
He was suffering with the devilish spirit himself.
Well, it's punishable under the Old Testament law.
Punishable under the Old Testament law.
was the only prophet of God at that time.
That's really what I was keying in on. And all of you are right, and we'll get to Dennis's comment in just a moment. But ultimately, Samuel was the direct line to the Lord, if you will, being the Lord's prophet, the one anointed by the Lord. And he grew up in the Lord, and he was the Lord's. And so now he's gone.
And
And
that
so,
told Saul that he could trust what that man told him.
exactly. So all the mediums and the spiritualists, they were all banished. For one, because Samuel was there, but number two, because of what Dennis mentioned as well. In Leviticus 19, verse 31. Leviticus 19, verse 31. In the law, it says, "Do not turn to mediums or spiritualists. Do not seek them out to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God." What do we learn? The Israelites were not to turn to these individuals. It says, do not seek them out, so don't be on the lookout for them. It says, do not be defiled by them. So there is a defiling element of being associated or involved with a medium or a spiritualist. I say spiritualist, but spiritists, technically. Right. In the next chapter, Leviticus 20, verse 7, or 27. Leviticus 20, verse 27. That now a man or a woman who is a medium or a spiritist shall surely be put to death. They shall be stoned with stones. Their blood guiltiness is upon them. So do not turn to them. Do not seek them. Do not be defiled by them. And if they're in your midst, kill them. And in particular, stone them. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 10 and 11. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, or the one who uses divination, or one who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. All of these individuals are to be banished from your midst, killed if they are. We're familiar with Samuel's words to King Saul when Samuel was still alive. In 1 Samuel chapter 15, he says, "For rebellion is as the sin of divination." Your rebellion, King Saul, is like or as equal to the sin of divination. Rebellion, divination, it's all sin in God's eyes. We'll talk more about it in a moment. We've got another passage to get to. But before we get to that, let's keep reading. Verse 3, Samuel's dead. Everybody lamented him. He was buried in his own city. Saul had removed all the mediums and spiritualists from the land, spiritists from the land. Verse 4. So the Philistines gathered together and came and camped in Shittim. And Saul gathered all Israel together, and they camped in Gilboa. Now, Andrew, I think I got another slide up there. Hopefully it'll show. Yeah, it does okay. So the orange is Saul's territory, Israelite territory, at the moment that is currently being protected. You have Ziklag down there at the bottom where that flag is at. And Ziklag, what city is that?
Where David is.
All right, that's what the city that David was given. There we go. You have Gath. That's where he was, if you will, in Achish's hair. So he says, give me a city, he goes to Ziklag. And then you follow this yellow line up. And then you got Mount Gilboa. On the other side is going to be this place where the Philistines go to encamp. All right, this is just under the Sea of Galilee, which is right above it. All right, back to verse 4. The Philistines gathered together, they came and camped in Shunem. Saul gathered all Israel together, they camped in Gilboa. Verse 5. When Saul saw the camp of the Philistines, he was afraid. and his heart trembled greatly. You paint the picture in your mind. Big old mountain. Army on one side, army on the other. Saul's afraid. Does that remind us of the story? Where little old David had to step in. Kill Goliath. Yep. Saul's afraid. Here he's afraid again. Does he have reason to be afraid?
Yeah.
Yeah, he does. Well, those of us who know the story, definitely. The Spirit of God has left them. That certainly caused for concerns, the largest concerns. The army was fearful. It had been victorious time and time again. And there they stand. He was afraid. His heart trembled greatly. I believe that's a Hebrew idiom or a metaphor. Doesn't mean it's, you can say his heart rate was up, his blood was really pumping. I think that's very true. His heart, his emotion, his demeanor was trembling. You get the image of that. Verse 6, when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or by Urim or by prophets. Saul tries to seek the Lord's help. And in its own right, is that a good thing?
That's a good thing.
Absolutely. There's nothing else that Saul should have done but seek the Lord. But there was a problem. The Lord did not respond unto Saul. You may ask why. He left him. We're gonna read exactly why here in a moment from a different book. We'll get there later. But the Lord did not answer him. Now don't look too far into this, but we'll mention it either by dreams. You can use dreams and so all throughout the text, the Old Testament. Urim, it was, well, you see it on a couple of occasions. You see it with Aaron and his breastplate, and ultimately it was a way of casting lots and seeing where lots fell, this portion or this portion, and it was just a way of choosing to see which way.
The other one was called a Urim
And Seraph or Ephraim.
It sounds.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, because it was a dual portion.
And they carried them, you're right in the breastplate.
Right.
And they used that for God to communicate with them.
Exactly. And of course, the means has been debated for a long time. I can't remember the second term. It's longer than the first.
Yeah.
I think it starts with an E, but I could be mistaken. But the prophets. What's the problem with that?
They're all dead now.
They're all dead. You got priests, but there may be other prophets, but certainly there wouldn't be one like Samuel. Then Saul said to his servants, "Seek for me a woman who is a medium." Now, okay, hold on. What do we think of that?
He'd already got them out and killed them.
Okay.
And now he's asking them to look for what he got rid of.
Yeah. All right. What else?
They don't do that.
Right. All right. What else? What do we think just from reading that? Some other commenters there. Seek for me a woman who is a medium. What have we already talked about?
He drove him out.
What's that?
He drove him out.
He drove him out. That's right.
They're kind of hard to find, so we're not advertising.
That's right. They're kind of under the radar, if you will. Kind of secluded.
So they might think it's a trap.
Absolutely. We'll see that in a moment. It was against the law, as you mentioned earlier.
That's it. To seek him is to do what they were doing.
Essentially, yes, because you'll be defined if you give it to them. Huh? Mediums were at that time, yes. Absolutely.
Saul sought God first, and when God didn't answer him, he went in the opposite direction.
That's right. And I think that's getting to the heart of what we're seeing here is that he sought the Lord and he didn't get an answer. Does that mean he should go betray the law, betray God, and seek the lowest form of any kind of sympathy he could contribute by going to a rebellious, wicked person. And of course, the answer is no, so it should strike us already when Saul's seeking a woman who's a medium. And, oh, that's probably no good. All right, that I may go and inquire of her. And so his servants responded, behold, there is a woman who is a medium at Endor. Okay. Then Saul disguised himself by putting on other clothes and went, he and 2 men with him. They came to the woman by night. All right, so he's got a disguise. 2 men with him. He comes at night. And he said, conjure up for me, please, and bring up for me whom I shall name to you. Now, if you're reading this, you've never read this passage, you're going to think, man, I've seen some movies about this. I've seen some TV shows in the past about this. What's going on? Is that the same thing? Okay, let's just read the text, figure out what's going on, we'll make some applications. Then Saul goes, very discreet manner. Conjure up for me, please. Now, we'll see what that means in a moment. Bring up for me, seemingly a person, whom I shall name to you. Now the woman said, verse 9, behold, you know what Saul has done. Now what does that tell us about what the woman felt about the man?
She knows the restriction she's under, and she's worried because she doesn't know the man she's talking to.
Exactly.
May have set her up.
Exactly. So does she know that this is Saul?
I don't think so.
She might,
I don't think so. But
because he was taller by a head.
and that's true.
Most people. So even though he changed his clothes disguise, he still can't hide the fact that he's taller than most everyone else.
That's very true. That's very true.
So she might have a suspicion, that's why she brings up, you know, Saul, hint, hint, you drove us out. I can't do this. So I think there might be a little, she suspects something's up.
Yeah, certainly there would be, because I definitely don't want to give off the impression that she just had zero idea, okay, yeah, let's do it. She was certainly aware that something awry is going on.
Yeah.
Because of what Saul had
She was
commanded.
obviously still active in doing it. That's how they knew to go to it.
Mhm.
So it's not like she quit doing it.
That's right.
So I think she's just seeking a promise. The very person who's coming to ask her to do something they both know is a violation of the law.
Right.
Maybe she's suspicious.
She is suspicious. Now, my understanding, this is just from my point of view, I don't think she knows it's Saul. Now, I can certainly see that there's some arguments for the other side, and honestly, it doesn't matter at the moment. She can figure it out 2 verses. So it's not a big deal. The point is, she's suspicious. Behold, you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off those who are mediums and spiritists from the land. Why are you then laying a snare for my life to bring about my death? She knows. She knows. And Saul vowed to her by the Lord. Oh boy. It's odd circumstance and setting to do that. Vow saying, as the Lord lives, we've seen that so many times in this book. As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. Now, again, in my understanding of her not knowing Saul, that would be kind of striking. As the Lord lives, so recognition that this is, man of the Lord. Of course, the woman said, behold, what Saul has done, he's done this. I assume that she doesn't know. However, the woman then says, whom shall I bring up for you? So we're adding context here. Verse 8 says, conjure up for me, please. Bring up for me whom I name to you. The woman replies, whom shall I bring up for you? And then he said, bring up Samuel for me. Okay, we're familiar with Samuel. Who is Samuel? He was a prophet. Is he alive or dead?
Then
He's dead. Verse 12. When the woman saw Samuel. And we gotta take it a little slow, because just want to make sure we're reading it correctly. She saw Samuel. Okay. Doesn't mean that Samuel is resurrected, alive, and well. I don't think that's the proper interpretation of what this seeing means. So we'll see that in a moment. However, she does see him. When the woman saw Samuel, again, Samuel's dead. And so when you start to put the puzzle pieces together, and I'll reveal to you my understanding of what's going on here, but I just want to emphasize, and when you're reading this, you may be like, what in the world's going on? That's why we're going to take it slow. She saw Samuel. Now, who is she? She's a medium and spiritist. When you think of mediums, you think of a medium between life and death. You've seen the TV shows, the medium of contacting the dead. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to be a medium. And let's say I take Jeff or Diane into my little courtyard and I say, your grandmother, she's passed away, right? Obviously, she'd be 100-something years old. There are tricks that these people play. And, of course, certainly if you book an appointment, they can look you up on Facebook, or you have a sister, always got Down syndrome, all the list goes on. They can figure that they aren't dumb, okay? Now, she sees Samuel. Now, what is the response? Verse 12. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. Now I'm going to ask you. You may think differently than me, but I'm going to ask you. When she cries out with a loud voice, do you think that's normal? Or something that's probably not normal?
Probably not normal.
Sounds like she's scared.
She's scared. Afraid and scared.
Remember the TV movie Ghost, where they go to a medium to contact their late boyfriend / husband, and he actually appears, and the medium, who is Whoopi Goldberg, freaks out because, it's like, what? This is not supposed to happen.
Exactly. That is my understanding of this text. That's the understanding throughout history, for that matter. Is that this is not a normal thing that actually happens to her, but this is something that God is allowing. But we are. Oh man, I got to speed it up. We're going to go as slow as we can, as fast as we can. I think this is a little bit unregular for her. You know, she cries out with a loud voice. Let's continue. And the woman spoke to Saul, saying, why have you deceived me? For you are Saul. The idea, well, how did he deceive her?
Well, he showed up in a disguise.
Exactly. He wasn't being honest that way. It's true. For you are Saul. The king said to her, do not be afraid. What does that imply about her? She was afraid, right? We're on the same page. We're on the same page. Wow. Okay. Now you could make the argument that she was afraid because the king had made the order to banish them all, and now the king's there. Gotcha.
Well,
However, I think it's
then because Samuel was the one that got the message from the Lord to tell Saul to do away with it. So he was a direct threat to her. That may be why she either gasped or hollered or screamed or, when she realized it's Samuel.
Sure. And so,
Samuel, it's possible he opened her eyes to who that was that was doing this for her. Do this for me.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's right. So she sees Samuel, verse 12, cried out with a loud voice. I wonder what she said. I don't know. It doesn't tell me. Why have you deceived me? For you're Saul. And the king said, do not be afraid. But what do you see? Implying, I read a couple of commentaries now. There are different views on this, but a couple of commentaries that said Samuel was right there before Saul. and he prostrated himself before Samuel. Well, why then would Saul say, "This would be my humble encouragement"? What do you see? Implying that she's the one seeing something.
Yeah.
What do you see? And the woman said to Saul, "I see," our translations differ here, "a divine being," some say gods, some say what? Spirit, coming up out of the earth. So what does she see? Divine being. The Hebrew relays the plurality of the word God. Now, God is seen in the plural, certainly in certain pronouns. He may, in regards to him making us in our image, or making man in his image, he used plural. However, my understanding of this would simply be that her understanding of the gods, in a pagan sense, is likely what she was thinking of. Now, that's my understanding. However, there are other takes that, okay, well, this is a God-like
Entity of plurality for God.
Could have actually been Saul's spirit.
Well, I wouldn't say
No.
that divine being would be Saul's spirit,
Samuel.
because he was named.
Samuel.
It would be Samuel. It would be Samuel.
But didn't God say that they know nothing of the world? That's in Psalms. The dead know nothing of the world.
Well, we'll get to that, because, of course, there are a lot of factors that play in with bringing.
But to
Bring
me,
it back.
it is a spirit from God, not necessarily Saul himself. Because he's
All
got
right, we'll get to that. All right. Now, for sake of clarity, whom shall I bring up for you, verse 11? Bring up Samuel for me. And the woman saw Samuel. She cried aloud with a loud voice. The woman spoke to Saul, saying, "Why have you deceived me for your Saul?" The king said to her, "Do not be afraid, but what you see." The woman said to Saul, "I see a divine being coming up out of the earth." Now, it's not just some random, it's coming up out of the earth, but it would seem to be from the dead. At least is the implication. I'm not saying it is. Just saying that's the implication. Could be true, might not be true, but keep reading. He said to her, "What is his form?" Now, would he ask that if he was actually seeing him? I suggest to you, no. He says, "What is his form?" She said, "An old man is coming up." Now, Samuel, an old man.
Yeah, you
Would have been, absolutely. And he's wrapped with a mantle. My translation says robe, same thing. Robe, 1 Samuel 15. What happened to that robe? Remember, Saul's robe was ripped. Okay, what happened to Samuel's robe? It doesn't really matter, but kind of draws your mind back. It was also ripped by who? King. Who's the king? Saul. This kingdom will be torn away from you. All right, and Saul knew that it was Samuel, and so he bowed with his face to the. So he in his mind, that's Samuel, and he prostrates himself to the ground. He bowed with his face to the ground and did homage. Then Samuel said to Saul, now I take this as Samuel speaking through this quote-unquote medium. However, I do believe that Samuel will get to why and the implication. Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me from bringing me up?" Okay, now, I'm trying to put myself in your position as somebody who might not have read this. You might say, "Is this really Samuel?" Okay, valid question. Get that. Just taking for it what it is. Whether it's her understanding or not. It's not my understanding because it doesn't say. She thinks it's or thinks it's Samuel. It is Samuel. However, he says, why are you drawing me up? What's he say? Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? In other words, you're disturbing me. I was somewhere, someplace. It tells us something about a different theological topic that Curtis was alluding to, what happens when you die. However, sake of time, we'll move on. We might get it a little bit later. Saul answered, "Well, I'm greatly distressed." And already, I get to put myself in Samuel's position. You call me back because you're distressed. For the Philistines are waging war against me, and God has departed from me and no longer answers me, either through the prophets or by dreams. Therefore, I called you that you make known to me what I should do. So I was trying to figure out what to do. The woman was afraid, whether it be, I think, both by Saul's presence and by seeing Samuel. And Saul is just as like, oh, that's Samuel. He prostrates himself, fall all the way to the ground. So he says, I'm distressed, need to know what to do. Samuel says, why then do you ask me? Since the Lord has departed from you and become your adversary. Couple things there. Am I not, in other words, he's saying, am I not the prophet of the Lord? If the Lord's deserted you, then why would he speak to you through me? It doesn't make sense. Why would you come looking for me if the Lord's departed from you? You're grasping literal straws here. And he says you made the Lord your adversary, which I think adds another dimension to this, that the Lord has been Saul's adversary. How? In just about every way you can imagine. In the life that he's choosing to live, certainly in his seeking after David's life, his abandonment of God. We continue. Samuel continues and says, the Lord has done accordingly as he spoke through me. For the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor today. And it's already been said multiple times. And he knows it. He knew it the last time he encountered David. He said just as much, the kingdom is now yours. I know that. I recognize that. And Samuel's saying, the Lord has done accordingly. The Lord has brought it about. Just he's spoken through me that David is going to be the one. Verse 18, as you did not obey the Lord and did not execute his fierce wrath on Amalek. Now, what's that in regard to?
Bring the king back.
All right. Which king?
Samuel.
Well, his name isn't Amalek, but king of the Amalekites, yeah. All right, 1 Samuel 15. 1 Samuel 15. He was instructed by the Lord to destroy the Amalekites completely.
Sheep, everything.
Sheep, women, children. That's right. And King Agag was spared. And so that's what's being alluded to here. And you're technically correct. Give me an honorary gold star. All right. Because you did not obey the Lord and did not execute his fierce wrath on Amalek, and so the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will also give over Israel. Oh, it has to sting. Along with you. Into the hands of the Philistines. Then it says, therefore tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. Indeed, the Lord will give over the army of Israel into the hand of the Philistines, with an exclamation mark in the English, showing emphasis. In other words, Israelites going to be defeated. You're going to die, and your sons are going to die. You're going to be with me. Now, again, that goes to the question of, is Samuel really here? I think he is, and God has allowed it. Just as what happened on the Mount of Transfiguration. You had Jesus and who? Moses and who? Elijah. That's right. And they were back in some kind of sense. It's the same kind of deal here. The Lord's allowing it. Is this medium conjuring it up? No, absolutely not. At least in my understanding.
But it's not something every dead person would be able to do.
Right. And so-
That God wanted to happen.
and bring about. And was what Samuel said true?
Yes.
Absolutely. Everything he said was true, 100% true. So the Lord was working through this situation, 100%, allowing it to happen. And then, therefore, tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. Now, again, this goes to a theological concept as to what Abraham's bosom is. I would believe that Samuel is in heaven and that Saul, I don't want to judge him, but preemptively by his life and on the basis of his unrepentance, I would say that ultimately what Samuel's saying is not necessarily talking about heaven, not necessarily talking about hell, not necessarily talking about the afterlife, but just, or paradise and torment, in my understanding at the moment, but rather just those who passed, those who passed on. Is my understanding at this point. Is, hey, tomorrow you're going to die. You can be with me. That's my take.
Well, I feel my needs on my phone.
I would be too. Now you see the response, and I know we're going over here. Bear with us. So what did Saul do?
Pass out.
Well, verse 20. Then Saul immediately fell full length upon the ground. So if he was already prostrated there, now he falls full length. I don't know if he's Superman. On the ground, was very afraid because of the words of Samuel. And I don't know what in the world the spiritist or the medium's thinking. She's probably just as afraid, I would imagine. It says there was no strength in Saul. You can kind of get that picture in your mind. I mean, he was already kind of dressed up where his
He concealed it all day.
yeah,
He's paralyzed with fear.
paralyzed. That's a great way to say it. And he had eaten no food all day and all night. And so the woman, verse 21, this is where the story kind of wraps up. The woman came to Saul and saw that he was terrified and said to him, "Behold, your maidservant has obeyed you. And I have taken my life in my hands." That means she's risked her life to even do this. And yes, she did it. "And I've listened to your words which you spoke to me. So now also please listen to the voice of your maidservant, and please let me set a piece of bread before you that you may eat and have strength when you go on your way." But he refused, and he said, "I will not eat." However, his servants, together with the woman, urged him, and he listened. So he arose from the ground and sat on the bed. The woman had a fattened calf in the house. She quickly slaughtered it. She took flour, kneaded it, and baked unleavened bread from it. And she brought it before Saul and his servants. And they ate. And then they arose and they went away that night. Okay, so we've gotten through the whole story. Now we can, all right, I'll make very quickly draw some conclusions here. Now, if there be any conclusion that we can take from it, I think we should allow the Scripture to speak if it does on a matter. And turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 10. If you have your Bible, I encourage you to turn there. And really, the whole chapter here is recalling what took place, but we just want to focus on verse 13 and 14. It says, "So Saul died for his trespass, which he committed against the Lord, because of the word of the Lord which he did not keep, and also because he asked counsel of a medium, making inquiry of it, and did not inquire of the Lord. Therefore God killed him, and turned the kingdom to David, the son of Jesse." So the Bible, being the great interpreter that it is, says that this is an awful thing that he did. It was wrong. It was sin. Saul knew it was sin. Everyone knows it was wrong. Saul knew it was wrong based upon the fact that he wouldn't eat until he finally gave in and he listened to them and he took something away. Sad situation. You know, you have Saul, the whole story of his life going from, man, he's got such great potential to now he's becoming more prideful, and now he's just altogether deserted the Lord. And you see this just downhill turn.
Why don't you turn to the dark side?
That sounds like a Star Wars quote, but maybe it's true. And I hope that my life, I mean, I'm 26 now, doesn't stay up here and then just slowly decline until I want nothing to do with the church and nothing to do with God. I pray that it just goes more and more and I'm the total opposite swing in my life. And of course, I don't know where you're at, but the moral of the lesson here is the pride of Saul infiltrated and absorbed and molded his entire life, that the Lord just became more and more absent to the point where he was in this life punished. And in the afterlife, that's not my call. However, we see what happens to a man who has so deserted the Lord that now the Lord won't hear his voice. And because we're low on time, I'll just mold this into a devotional. We'll just sing one song, if that's okay. Turn to Proverbs chapter 1. While you're turning there, I'll read another passage that gives time to read. Isaiah chapter 8, verse 19. When they say to you, consult the mediums and the spiritualists, who whisper and mutter, should not a people consult their God? Should they consult the dead on behalf of the living? It's a good verse to consider throwing into context here. Proverbs chapter 1, let's start with verse 20. Let's talk about wisdom. Of course, wisdom is personified. What does that mean? Go back to our English here. What does that mean? Personification. Okay, yeah, in a sense, Charlotte's